Hi everyone. In this video we will discuss about macroeconomics in details. Economics is the study of the production, consumption and transfer of wealth. There are two branches of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Macro is the Greek root meaning large and micro is the Greek root meaning small. Microeconomics is the study of individuals, households, and firms' behavior in decision making and allocation of resources. It generally applies to markets of goods and services and deals with individual and economic issues. Whereas macroeconomics is the branch of economics studying the overall economy on a large scale. Macroeconomics means studying inflation, price levels, economic growth, national income, gross domestic product, and unemployment numbers. Macroeconomics focuses on how the entire economy functions. It tries to find ways to maximize the standard of living and achieve economic growth. There are many changes and variables that affect the entire economy of a country. These include, but are not limited to, unemployment, productivity, inflation, and other economic indicators. Macroeconomics studies the results from many different countries and how their policies compare. It analyzes the failure and success of governments based on economic indicators and performance. Principles of macroeconomy. Basic macroeconomics focuses on five main principles: economic output, economic growth, unemployment, inflation and deflation, and investment. We'll see each of these in details. First, economic output. Economic output is the primary indicator considered in macroeconomics. It is measured by the gross domestic product, that is GDP, of a country or region. GDP is calculated in one of the two ways. First, add up all the money spent by businesses, consumers, and the government. Adjust to remove the effects of inflation. Second, add up the money received by all participants in the economy. Adjust to remove the effects of inflation. Government typically release their GDP either annually or quarterly. Formula for calculating GDP is Y equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where Y equals to gross domestic product, C is consumption, I is investment, G is government spending, X is export, and M is imports. Economic growth. Economic growth is measured by comparing GDP over time. This is calculated with the basic formula GDP2 minus GDP1 divided by GDP1. It is important that the earlier GDP is the GDP1. This will show if the growth is positive or negative. Macroeconomic study helps in understanding the causes of underdevelopment and the other socio-economic problems such as poverty and inequality in the economy. Accordingly, it helps in determining suitable policies to combat the same. Similarly, it helps to deal with such problems as underutilization of resources, thereby help in working towards increasing the productive efficiency in the economy. Economists play a vital role in unraveling the drivers of economic growth. This theory dwells into the factors that contribute to a country's sustained increase in production and living standards over time. Economists examine the role of technology, investment, education, and innovation in fostering economic growth. Their insights assist policymakers in formulating strategies to encourage long term economic development. Unemployment. Unemployment is also a major macroeconomic variable. Unemployment is the number of people who are not employed but are seeking employment. It doesn't include those not looking for work, such as children, retired people, and disabled people. Unemployment can't be eliminated completely, but it can be sorted into different types. Cyclical unemployment relates to changes in business cycles. Frictional unemployment relates to when people are actively searching for a job. Structural unemployment relates to job elimination because of economic structural changes. These can be combined to provide different ways of viewing unemployment overall. Natural unemployment is a combination of frictional and structural unemployment. This is based on basic events like changing jobs or industries being is less demand. Natural unemployment is used to understand long-term trends. Actual unemployment is found by adding the natural unemployment and the cyclical unemployment. This takes into consideration recessions and other business cycle changes. Actual unemployment is used to understand short term economic conditions. The formula for unemployment rate is the number of people who are not employed divided by the total number of eligible workers. The formula for the labor participation rate is a bit different because it only considers the civilian workforce. The labor participation rate is found by dividing the total civilian population available for work divided by the number of those people who are working or seeking work. Both the unemployment rate and the labor participation rate can be used to measure unemployment. Inflation and deflation. Inflation is an increase in the price levels and thus a decrease in purchasing power. For example, if milk costs rupees 20 and then years later the same milk costs rupees 22. This will be a 10% inflation rate over that period of time. Inflation typically happens because of increased demand or limited supply. Inflation at a controllable rate represents growth. However, if inflation occurs too quickly or at too high of a rate, purchasing power decreases and the currency can be devalued. The ideal inflation rate is usually between 1 to 3%. Deflation is a decrease in price levels and thus an increase in purchasing power. When inflation rates fall below 0%, that is any negative number, deflation has occurred. Deflation can increase the value of a currency unless it is too sudden. The Consumer Price Index, that is CPI, is a measure of the variation in prices paid for retail goods and items. The quantity theory of money states that the general price of goods is directly proportional to the amount of money in circulation. If the amount of money in circulation doubles, this theory says prices will also double. This directly relates to the inflation and deflation rate of a country. Economists investigate the theory of general price level to understand the factors influencing price changes. They explore inflation, deflation, and the causes behind these movements. By examining the relationship between money supply, demand, and prices, economists aid in devising strategies to manage inflation and ensure the stability of purchasing power. Investment. In macroeconomics, investment consists of the additions to the nation's capital stock of buildings, equipment, software, and inventories during a year, or alternatively, investment spending. Spending on productive physical capital such as machinery and construction of buildings and on changes to inventories. In macroeconomics, investment relates to the interest rate set by the central bank. In the United States, this is the Federal Reserve, while in Canada, this is the Bank of Canada and its Reserve Bank of India in India. Each country has its own central bank that large purchases sets the interest rates. Interest rates greatly influence consumer spending. When the interest rate is low, consumers spend more and are more likely to make large purchases like a home or a business. When interest rates are high, consumers are less likely to make purchases because they are more expensive. Controlling interest rates is one way governments influence economic activity. For the economy as a whole, aggregate savings is equal to investment, which is usually in the form of borrowed funds available as a result of savings. Importance of macroeconomics. First, economic performance and indicators. Understanding the overall economic health of a country is essential for policymakers and analysts. Macroeconomics allows us to assess indicators such as gross domestic products, that is GDP, which measures the total value of goods and services produced within a country. For instance, if a country GDP grows healthy, it suggests economic expansion and increased prosperity. Example, if the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, macroeconomists closely monitor GDP growth rates to gauge the effectiveness of stimulus packages in boosting economic recovery. Second, policy formulation. Macroeconomic analysis informs the creation of economic policies that addresses key issues such as inflation, unemployment, and economic growth. Governments and central banks adjust monetary and fiscal policies based on macroeconomic insights. Example, during period of high inflation, central banks might implement contradictory monetary policies such as rising interest rates to curb inflationary pressure. Third, business cycle prediction. Macroeconomics helps anticipate economic fluctuations such as business cycles. Economists can identify the stages of economic expansion and contribution by analyzing indicators like employment rates and consumer spending. Example, macroeconomists predicted the 2008 recession by observing a decline in consumer spending and a rise in unemployment before the crisis hit. Fourth, Trade and international economics. Macroeconomics plays a role in understanding a country's international trade dynamics. Macroeconomic factors influence exchange rates and trade balances. Example, a country with a strong currency might experience reduced export demand, affecting its trade balance and economic growth. Fifth, resource allocation. Macroeconomic analysis informs resource allocation decisions. Policymakers can use insights to determine government spending levels, tax policies, and investments in various sectors. Example, a government might allocate resources to education and technology sectors to foster long-term economic growth and innovation. Sixth, employment and inflation. Macroeconomics examines the trade-off between unemployment and inflation. The Phillips curve demonstrates the inverse relationship between these two variables. Example, policymakers must balance the desire for low unemployment with the need to control inflation, as reducing one may lead to increase in the other. Seventh, stability and crisis management. Macroeconomics help prevent and manage economic crisis by monitoring financial market stability, debt levels, and banking sector health. Example, after the 2008 financial crisis, regulatory measures were implemented to strengthen the banking system and prevent a similar collapse. 8. Long-term growth and development. Macroeconomics studies factors contributing to sustain economic growth and improved living standards, including infrastructure and human capital investments. Example, countries investing in education and healthcare can experience long-term increases in productivity and living standards. Ninth, global economic coordination. In an interconnected world, macroeconomics aids in coordinating policies to address global challenges such as climate change and financial market stability. Example, international agreements on reducing carbon emission require macroeconomic considerations to assess their impact on economic growth and stability. Below are summary points of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics study aggregated indicators such as GDP, unemployment rates, and price indices to understand the whole economy functions. Macroeconomists develop models that explain the relationship between such factors as national income, output, consumption, unemployment, inflation, savings, investment, government spending, and international trade. Through macroeconomics encompasses a variety of concepts and variables, but there are three central topics for macroeconomics research on the national level, that is output, unemployment, and inflation. Aggregate demand is downward sloping as a result of three consumption sensitivities, that is wealth effect, interest rate effect, and foreign exchange effect. Spending is related to income, that is income minus spending equals to net savings. For the economy as a whole, aggregate saving is equal to investment, which is usually in the form of borrowed funds available as a result of savings. An economy which relies primarily on interactions between buyers and sellers to allocate resources is known as a market economy. Markets work by placing many interested buyers and sellers, including households, firms, and government agencies, in one place, thus making it easier for them to find each other. Healthy financial systems are associated with the accelerated development of an economy. Business cycles are identified as having four distinct phases, that is expansion, peak, contraction, and through. Business cycle fluctuations occur around a long-term growth trend and are usually measured by considering the growth rate of real gross domestic product. In the United States, it is generally accepted that the National Bureau of Economic Research is the final arbiter of the date of the peaks and through of the business cycle. 13. Macroeconomic indicators such as GDP, unemployment, investment spending, capacity utilization, household income, business profits, and inflation fall, while bankruptcies and the unemployment rate rise. Most mainstream economists believe that recession are caused by inadequate aggregate demand on the economy and favor the use of expansionary macroeconomic policy during recessions. Strategies favored for moving an economy out of a recession vary depending on which economic school the policymakers follow. If the economy needs to be slowed, enacted policies are referred to as being contractionary, and if the economy needs to be stimulated, the policy prescription is expansionary. Central banks use monetary policy measures to facilitate consistent economic growth, while the government uses fiscal policy. The government policy measures are referred to as fiscal policy. Growth is usually calculated in real terms, meaning that it is inflation adjusted to eliminate the distorting effect of inflation on the price of goods produced. Policymakers strive for continued and consistent growth. The large impact of a relatively small growth rate over a long period of time is due to the power of compounding. A small difference in economic growth rates between countries can result in very different standards of living for their populations if the small difference continues for many years. Thank you. Hope this video will be helpful for you. Would like to hear from you. Please provide your comments and subscribe to get updates.